Hello, friends. Hello, comrades. Welcome to another interview hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. Today, we're talking with Dr. Anthony Monteiro, longtime activist in the struggle for socialism and Black liberation, scholar and expert in the work of W.E.B. Du Bois. In fact, he's one of the most cited Du Bois scholars in the entire world. He's worked and taught longer than most of us have even been alive. Currently, he organizes with the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation in Philadelphia.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right. Well, we're super happy to have you here with us today, Dr. Monteiro. I'll ask the first question here then. Can you tell us a bit about your life? You've been able to meet and work with many people who are idols for us and today's revolutionaries. So how did you yourself get into revolutionary activism?
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't intended to begin talking about myself, but everything for me began with the community that I grew up in. I'm from Philadelphia, from the Black community, and the church that I belonged to as a kid, the church that I was baptized in, and that church had a social gospel, which meant that the church was organized around the struggle for freedom and for civil rights. And then I went to a historically Black college in Pennsylvania, one of the first, if not the first, historically Black college in the nation, Lincoln University, which is kind of a historic place. Although it is a small college, even up till today, and back then it was a small liberal arts, predominantly male, almost completely Black, and such people as the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, graduated from there. The first president of Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe, graduated from there. The first Black on the Supreme Court, Thurgood Marshall, graduated from Lincoln, as did the poet, the literary figure that's considered the poet laureate of the African American people, Langston Hughes, graduated from there. So we thought of ourselves then as inheriting this legacy, but also we thought of ourselves, we could have been wrong, but we thought of ourselves as the most revolutionary student body, and that didn't mean everybody was a revolutionary, but we also thought of ourselves as the smartest student body. So much so that if a Black person, for example, came to our campus from, let us say, Yale University, we were very unkind to them, even driving them off the campus, because we felt that they were sellouts because they went to a white college, and we were keeping it real. But that's when I came in contact with the ideas of Frantz Fanon and Mao Zedong. And because over half of our student body was from Africa, which was very interesting. Half of our student body was from Africa, and half of them were from the still colonized countries of Southern Africa. And so the life world for most of us was a radical attempt to understand the Black community and the Black struggle, and to understand the struggle against colonialism in Africa, especially Southern Africa, and to understand the world, including the Cuban Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, and so on. When I graduated, I got a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship to go to the University of Chicago. But even before I could begin my studies there, my graduate studies in political science, I learned that I was being sought by the FBI and the Philadelphia police for allegedly participating in the planning of a riot in Philadelphia and poisoning 1,500 police. Clearly, I mean, that was an outlandish kind of thing. I didn't know anything about poison or any of that, but it was a COINTELPRO operation. As the civil rights movement came north, as organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and later the Black Panther Party had an urban focus, COINTELPRO followed these young men and women and were always surveilling us and ultimately trying to entrap us. So I never finished my graduate studies at the University of Chicago, but I did meet people, especially a man named Robert Rhodes, and we set up a study group, and we were reading Das Kapital. And every Sunday we would meet and discuss Das Kapital. And among the members of the study group were Fred Hampton and a couple of other people, Bobby Rush, who was the chairman, I think, then of the Chicago Black Panther Party. They were members of the study group. But eventually I returned to Philadelphia and I wanted to share what I was learning with my peer group. And so I joined with a group of young men in North Philly who set up a kind of community house known as the Brotherhood House. And every Sunday I was teaching courses in political economy, historical materialism, the history of the 20th century, and such things as that. At some point, they asked me to leave because they felt I was bringing too much bad attention to their efforts, and of course, I left. But then I was like an itinerant teacher of Marxism. With friends, I set up a reading group in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then reading groups in Philadelphia. But clearly, that was not enough. And a lot of the commentary on Marxism and Leninism that we were reading came from Soviet authors and from magazines from the Soviet Union. And believe me, I guess you guys have never had that experience. But to have a large nation which was committed to revolutionary and liberatory principles and printed magazines and books on such things as dialectical logic, historical materialism, Marxist-Leninist philosophy, then a whole lot of stuff in physics and the natural sciences. That was such an enormous resource, especially in the United States, where neither in universities nor in the public generally was there any real serious scholarship in Marxism and Leninism, especially in these fields like the physics of the national liberation movements and so on. It was a great resource. And so I kind of continued that, but I somehow met a person who was involved with the Communist Party, and he said, "Look, man, we're forming a youth organization in Chicago," and that became the Young Workers' Liberation League. Several of us from Philadelphia, we got in a car, we went out there, we were impressed. I joined the Young Workers' Liberation League, which was like the youth wing of the Communist Party. And then eventually, in a few months, I joined the Communist Party. I was already ideologically predisposed to the worldview of the Communist Party. And then for about 27 years, I was a member of the Communist Party in various levels of leadership, but I was essentially an activist. I don't know if I was the smartest person in the world, but I don't know. I have this thing. If I believe in something, I want to share it with other people. So I became a public communist, running for Congress, which did not improve my job possibilities, as you can imagine. And so I was working at a graduate school for people going into education, connected to Antioch. And when I told them that I was also running for Congress from Philadelphia on the Communist Party ticket, I don't know how they went about, but they asked me to leave, so boom, I'm out of that job. But I ran for office. Of course, it was an uphill battle, but it was not just about winning office, but about winning the people. This was the same time that Angela Davis was arrested. So, and right at the same time that Huey P. Newton kind of won his case and was released. So I became a part of the movement to free Angela Davis. But also, and I think for me this was very important, that I met all of these Black communists, but also white communists, which was a revelation to me. I know you guys talk about Gus Hall, and definitely very significant figure, and I learned that he was a steel worker and a Finnish background from northern Minnesota, the iron fields, and that he had done 8 years in prison under the McCarthyite laws. And then, of course, I think the most important influence on my life in the Communist Party was Henry Winston. But there were many others. There were, the legendary William L. Patterson, and there were others. If you ask me, I could, give more names. But to meet these people who went back to the 1920s and 1930s in radical politics, who were ordinary people, who were not performative, very, as you would say, gentle in the sense of gentleman and gentlewoman, very polite people, those people that you think of when you say, oh, you had good upbringing, the thank you and please And Henry Winston exemplified that for me. I mean, just a wonderful person from Mississippi, which, you know, elevated his street cred for me, because, you know, being from the North, we feared Mississippi. I mean, we didn't even like going down south, even though we had relatives down there. It was associated with racial terror. And here was a guy from Mississippi, and, you know, but I consider Winston, all things considered, to have been the greatest American communist. He guided the party. And you know, it's different in guiding a semi-legal party, and we were semi-legal. We were mainly above ground. At least we had above ground members and so on. But most members had to be underground. You know, all the time that you're highly infiltrated. But that was no thing, frankly, because the way you deal with deep state players and the infiltration of movements, and they infiltrate every movement up until today. But the way you deal with it, especially being in this country, is the strength of the ideological cohesion and ideological clarity of the party. And that's where Henry Winston was really masterful in guiding the party and clarifying what the tasks were, and frankly, an unbelievable work ethic, unbelievable to see. You know, this concept of scientific organization and paying attention to details, and as he would say, follow up. And, you know, he was always, just to give you a little flavor, he was always on time. He was very intolerant of lateness. You know, being in a communist party, people think, you know, we can get there when we get there. But he always said that to be late is showing disrespect for the collective and for other comrades. He was always a stickler about being on time. And the other thing is what he called follow up. You know, we agreed upon this at our last meeting. Now let's see how far we've come to realizing in concrete terms what we agreed to. He was huge on democratic centralism. He was a very democratic person, but once things were decided by vote, then that was the policy. And, you know, you could go your own way. You didn't have to do it, but we felt, and this was the moral imperative, if you will, that if you are a communist and things have been agreed to, you are obligated politically and morally to carry out the decisions of the collective, be they your local party group or the national conventions of the party. And so I was at some point tapped by Henry Winston to lead in the struggle for Africa's independence. And that focused primarily upon Southern Africa. And in 1973, really under the leadership of Winston and the party, we formed an organization. We were hoping it would be a coalition, but there were many obstacles, called the National Anti-Imperialist Movement in Solidarity with African Liberation. Short name, so too long of a title. But we wanted to really differentiate ourselves from the cultural nationalists and what Winston ultimately called the Neo-Pan-Africanist. In that work, I was able to travel to many countries in Africa, to be in touch with leaders of the national independence movements in South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, but others, Ethiopia, and so on. And Africa, then, as it will be as we go forward, was the center of the great struggle between imperialism and anti-imperialism, because Africa has these mineral resources, this rich cultural background, and this the potential of its population. And then, of course, so many of the leaders, I always emphasize this when I, am engaged with the so-called neo-Pan-Africanists or cultural nationalists who are experts in Africa 5,000 years ago. But if you say, have you ever heard of Marion Ngouabe of the People's Republic of the Congo? Their answers were, what did you say? Or Modiba Keita, or they might know Patrice Lumumba or Kwame Nkrumah. But in fact, there was this battle in the United States, especially among the younger generation, over, as it was put then, what liberation movements were to be supported. And there were a whole group of liberation movements that were more cultural nationalists, which is to say they were, quote, Pan-Africanists, but at the same time anti-communist and anti-Soviet. This kind of came to a head in 1974. If I'm talking too much, you could shut me down.
We're really, really happy just to listen to this. This is fascinating.
Yes,
for us.
agreed.
I love hearing it.
Yeah, let me just say a few other things if you guys don't mind. And then, because I want to get to the collapse of the Soviet Union and kind of where we are today, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no. We actually had a question concerning that and some of the scholarship going around today later on. Mm-hmm. But no, continue. Please continue. Please.
Yeah, well, so a group of primarily what we'd call cultural nationalists and neo-Pan-Africanists tried to hijack the Pan-African movement of the past and the liberation movements that were current at that time, especially in Southern Africa. So they call a Sixth Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. That's in East Africa. And they immediately came up against the liberation movements, who politically and ideologically rejected their line and asserted in no uncertain terms that the liberation movements of Southern Africa were part of the world revolutionary process and did not embrace or accept anti-communism and anti-Sovietism. This was a great achievement, and it reverberated back in the United States, so much so, and this is something, I guess it might be hard to imagine if you weren't there, people who had been Pan-Africanists and cultural nationalists almost overnight became, quote, communists of sorts. They referred to themselves as Marxist, Leninist, Mao Zedong thought kind of communists, which was not my kind of communist, but nonetheless, this great rupture. Oh, I should say one other thing, just you asked me about myself. In 1970, I headed a delegation of young communists from the United States to the Congress of what was called the Komsomol, the Young Communist League of the Soviet Union. And, because they had to translate your speeches, you had to write them out before you gave them. And they decided that my speech should be given at one of the plenums, the plenary sessions, when pretty much the whole Politburo of the Soviet Communist Party would be present. And by that, Brezhnev, Kosygin, Podgorny, I don't know who else. And then this was the 100th anniversary of the birth of Lenin. And so there was a great celebration for youth in what was then called Leningrad, which I hope it will return to that name, today called St. Petersburg. And so there was a celebration there, and you can ask me something, but because it was the 1945 was the end of the war. About 25 years after the end of World War II, and so we were taken to Volgograd, the historic city of Stalingrad, where this great battle was fought, and from there I was invited to go to North Vietnam as a part of a youth delegation of solidarity with the people of Vietnam. But then, the six-pack, which is 4 years later. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, it was a very fluid political moment. The forces of world revolution, I think, were ascendant. The U.S., in a relative sense, I would say, was weaker then because of the Soviet Union and the world socialist system than it is today, interestingly. And it is weak today. But we saw what we were doing as on the ascension, and imperialism on the decline. And a big part of that had to do with the communist and socialist leaders on the African continent. And I always encourage people to look these people up, to study them, to know them. And you will understand why the United States and the West was so brutal in their assassination of leader after leader and the overthrow of government after government on the African continent.
Just to interrupt real quick.
Go ahead, yes.
After this, we will definitely post the names that we're referring to here and some links to where people can find information about them if they want to look that up.
Yeah. That'll be very important, I think, because even today, to understand where humanity is going politically, you have to know Africa and this Africa-Asia alliance. But I was involved for many years in the anti-apartheid and pro-liberation movements on the continent of Africa and here, and other things having to do with the global peace movement. And you can ask me questions about this. I saw close up the world communist movement, and I saw what that movement was. I saw it as the greatest global peace movement that humanity has yet produced, not standing singularly or alone, but in concert with other forces. The world communist movement, as I experienced it, was in a sense politically and ideologically the outcome of the defeat of Nazism. Communists knew from their own bitter experience what war meant. And I don't care where you went in the world, be it in Vietnam or Korea or Angola or Cuba, the world communist movement was made up of veteran fighters, self-sacrificing veteran fighters against war and imperialism. So in that sense, I wasn't an armchair revolutionary, I guess you could say.
It's amazing hearing all of this, and it really makes me sort of mourn for what was lost. In the last period of history. I look around and the people that call themselves communists today, it sort of just seems like some, personal sense of identification.
Definitely.
Right? Like they're like, oh, I kind of like the working class. you know, rather than this giant global movement. And this is how, like, my grandparents would speak of when they lived back in the Soviet Union. That was just how people lived. It was like just this sense of togetherness and family with everyone around you. And it just, it makes me really, really sad for what, could have been.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I don't know. We've been on this a while, and for me, I would love to just discuss all of this the whole time. But I want to get on to some other things.
Go ahead.
Just a lot of it, so our viewers can have a good sense of what you do and where you're at and what the free school is, and why we seem to get along so well. So our second real question is that from our experience with you, there seems to be 4 primary American figures that are fundamental to your thought, right? And your project, which is WEB Dubois, of course, James Baldwin, Henry Winston, and Martin Luther King Jr. I want to start with Du Bois because for us, he's one of, if not the most brilliant American mind in history, and by far the most original of our most creative of our Marxist thinkers. So what do you think is important about studying Du Bois specifically today? And do you think the ways he's being studied, especially in the academy, are correct? I really want to tie this into, though, what you spoke about, the neo-Pan-Africanists, which, for anyone who's not aware, is not the same as what Du Bois sort of thought up as the original Pan-Africanism, which is a lot closer to what Dr. Monteiro was just describing as the sort of world movement.
Yeah. It's very interesting. When I went to college, it was the height of the Cold War. And to be very frank about it, even at a black college, the name W.E.B. Du Bois could not be mentioned. He had been erased. I don't think you can imagine it. The greatest American thinker erased from academic discourse, even at a black college. His name was not mentioned. I recall, as a student trying to read his third autobiography, and Du Bois is not an easy read. He doesn't read like most other philosophers or thinkers. And I found it difficult, confusing. But it was not until I got into the Communist Party and all of these people who had literally been mentored by Du Bois would always be talking about Dr. Du Bois, and they always called him Dr. Du Bois, Dr. Du Bois, Dr. Du Bois, and Winston, of course, always, and Patterson, all of them. So with the collapse of the Soviet Union, I had a chance to revisit Du Bois. And because I was, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, I wasn't one of these people, by the way, and you maybe heard me in other interviews, Noah, talking about certain huge figures and public intellectuals who, in the face of the collapse of the Soviet Union, literally threw in the towel and became social democrats and liberals, or Garveyite nationalist, or whatever. And I didn't. That for me, that wasn't an option at all. In fact, when the Communist Party split over Gorbachev versus Leninism and all of that type of thing, I was by no means going to go with those people siding with Gorbachev under the guise of, and this is what was motivating it, the leader of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union must know what they're doing. Well, actually, they didn't. And if you ask me, and this was unthinkable that the Soviet state and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union had been penetrated to the highest level. And that in many ways, it is not hard to conclude that Mikhail Gorbachev himself was working on behalf of Western intelligence. He undid so much so quickly, without any sense of regret, with this smile, this snicker on his face. As you can see, I don't like the guy. But so I got back into Du Bois. I'm trying to find Du Bois and Lenin, Leninist theory, etc., and Du Bois's theory. And that's how I got to that. You know, along the way, I got a PhD and started working at universities, which was no big thing. Then found myself involved in the African American Studies program at Temple. I was invited there after having taught at a science university. And it was good in some ways, but not so good in other ways. And I ended up being fired by a leading figure of cultural nationalism, MLK Asante. And I had to fight for my job. I never got my job back. But in the meantime, I formed the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. It was an attempt to do what Black Studies originally set out to do, to link ideas to the community, link scholars to the community. We eventually left Temple because it was not accepting of what we were doing. And we ended up at a historic church in North Philadelphia called the Church of the Advocate. And we were there for about 9 years, and now we're not there any longer. But we continue our work in Philadelphia. I guess, yeah.
I looked into the thing with you fighting for your job a while ago. I think the tactics that have changed in the sort of bourgeois end of the class struggle really come out in things like that. It's, you know, less like there's an FBI agent right here next to me, and more that during the last period, they built all this infrastructure to have the middle classes do this work for them. And so just being brought up in this sort of counter-revolutionary atmosphere leads someone to want to repress a more liberatory idea that's coming to the fore in the present, you know?
Yeah. And you know, and the tragedy is, especially for you guys, you know, there was more academic freedom in the period of McCarthyism than there is today. The ruling class has completely taken over the university. Completely. In fact, you know, with my young colleagues in the free school, I feel so sad at times for them and for all young people who are fed constantly identity politics, counter-revolutionary, anti-revolutionary theories. Even the Marxism that they learn is garbage. And even up to this day, and I guess we could talk about it, Du Bois is not welcomed in African American studies. In fact, when I was fired, you know, the news media in Philadelphia asked Asante, they said, well, who's going to teach Du Bois? And he said, we don't need Du Bois at this time. We're turning towards culture, by which he meant hip hop culture. I could see if he meant African culture. I said, are you on dope? You know, but that's how would you say, how trivial what is called academic discourse has become. And it is trivial. It is not serious.
It seems to me to trivialize the entire Black freedom struggle.
Well, no question about it.
Right, to reduce like the immensity of Du Bois to hip hop culture is a crime against humanity, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And a crime against young people.
Especially. I'm not. Carlos and Eddie have a lot more experience with the academy than I do. But I tell you, there's a sort of notion within the modern proletariat that it's useless. That the academy is the enemy, and that's a correct intuition as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Sorry, I really, really resonate with everything you're saying too. Some people might know I actually recently was terminated from my job as well, and they didn't explicitly link it to my political activism, but there was a campaign of people contacting the college and asking them to, and I was constantly having to have meetings, and I wasn't even teaching, I was a wrestling coach, but I was constantly being pushed, to post less, do less communist activism. And, also at this school, I was tutoring kids, and, what you said about what they're being taught, I found to be true also. I mean, they would learn Marxism, but it was so watered down and so liberalized that I could hardly recognize it. And then there would also be posters hanging up all around the school that said, these countries are liberal democracies, with, they rate 10 out of 10 on the freedom index. And then, China and these other countries are authoritarian dictatorships and they have no freedom. So it's just a one-sided sort of view that these kids are beat over the head with. And then if there's anyone like me who the college suspects is telling them something different, they're pushed out, or anyone like Dr. Monteiro obviously is a better example than me. But
it's crazy to me that they have something like the freedom index on the walls at a college. And I know, like, the Marxism they do. What did you call that, Doc? The inverted commas?
Yeah, inverted commas.
Well, it seems that the bourgeoisie has grown smart enough to understand that it operates as the personified agents of a system that crashes every 8 or so years, and that when it crashes, it produces mass dissatisfaction. And I think almost organically, people tend to go towards the right position. So they need to create these theaters where, the puppets, the people that, a comrade of ours, Gabriel Rocco, he calls them radical recuperators. They recuperate all the energy that is popping up in these moments of dissatisfaction and just shift it away towards what, I've tended to call controlled counter-hegemony. It's they need this as a sort of pressure valve, a way of releasing the fact that dissatisfaction is bound to come in the masses. And it's taken more and more and more forms as time has gone on. They have concretized this strategy to the point where, today you even get what was the opposition to, like, the New Left, which was the first sort of experiment that they did with this. And you find similar forms of it existing within Marxist-Leninists, which was the one that they never came around to accepting or to trying to use as that form of a controlled counter-hegemonic opposition, which could lead us to a question that we have at the end. But I wanted to ask maybe for you to flesh out a little bit more about Winston, because unfortunately, out of the 4 primary names that we mentioned, he seems to be the most least known by the American people today. But his brilliance, at least for us, is either commensurate or almost commensurate with that of Dr. Du Bois. Can you tell us about Winston a little more? Can you tell us about your time with him, his deep humanity, which is something that, Noah mentioned, communism being reduced to an identity today. And, I think that when you look at his character, at least from what I've been able to read and from the interviews that I've heard you speak about, it's just so impressive and at least for me, that's almost a precondition for being a communist, being a good human being. But his thought as well, and how he would carry on the spirit of Dr. Du Bois in an era of rampant neo-Pan-Africanism and skin strategy-based movements, which, regardless of their intentions, were de facto functioning to proliferate divisions amongst working people.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine, I think, that being a young person, never having met a figure who had been a communist all of his adult life, had gone to prison for his political beliefs, had done, I think, 6 or 7 years at Terre Haute Federal Penitentiary in Indiana, and while there had lost his sight. But as I say, he nor other communists did not fit certain of the assumptions that I had of what a revolutionary looked like. You have to remember that, my generation was heavily influenced by the July 26 movement, or what we thought we knew of the July 26 movement and the Cuban Revolution. And of course, we associated being a revolutionary with wearing fatigues or camouflage outfits. But these were different kinds of people. They were not performative. He was not performative. He was a man of ideas. Although he never graduated from high school, he didn't get his high school degree until he goes to prison and he gets a GED. But he had studied at the Lenin School, an autodidact, an organic intellectual, a self-made intellectual, a person who was interested in ideas because he was interested in freedom. I mean, it was just amazing to see human beings like that, and fearless. And what a lot of people don't know, Henry Winston was the political organizer of the movement to free Angela Davis. Very important political decisions had to be made when she was arrested. And we could have gone in any number of wrong directions. For example, the idea, we will defend her as a communist. And Winston said, no, we will defend her as a Black woman communist. That it would be this mass of Black people who would be her first line of defense. And then, of course, the internationalism of the party and of Winston in particular said that this movement must be a global movement. And hence, Angela becomes this worldwide figure and a loved figure because of, her own steadfastness, but really the organization and political capacity, I think, of Henry Winston. And there would not be a day that went by or a Central Committee meeting where there was not a major report given on Angela Davis. And he was always concerned, because he had lost his sight in prison, with her health, and he would, all of that, and the politics, what this district was doing, what that was doing, and were we making headway in winning churches and trade union leaders and others. And when he always, by the way, Winston always had this optimism and this expansive sense of what was possible. No, you probably heard us say this a lot at the Du Bois thing, the capacity of the American people. He believed in it. That's, you could ask me something else, but being around that, and as you said, I think Noah said, his high moral standards. He wasn't puritanical or anything. By the way, his favorite singer was Ray Charles. He's from the South. When he was a blues man. and you know, it's just a normal black man who achieved so much. And by the way, you know, I met his mother and his sisters, and Winston was tall, and his mother was tall, and his two sisters were tall. And I remember meeting them, and one of the things, you know, small things impress you, is that they ate Southern black food. You know, it was so interesting, and how Henry Winston, interacted with his own mother, who outlived him. And I don't think they were that far different in ages, you know, maybe 15 years. And then his sisters, and how they were always taking care of him, looking over him, trying to protect him. And it was so interesting to me that here is Henry Winston, the guy that did all his time in federal penitentiary, lost his sight, and his mother, still his mother. You know, it's so interesting.
You know, you can often tell a lot about a person by their relationship with their mother.
Tell me about that.
I mean, compare Henry Winston to, you know, the people that want to run around calling themselves communists today, and the edgy teenage angst sort of thing. It's night and day. Also, I just want to say that you're out of your mind if you don't eat Southern black food. I'm sorry, it's just delicious. What are you gonna, you know? But yeah, Henry Winston is sort of, you know, he's a hero of the Institute, obviously. But in my own sort of like development into the man I am today, the way he acted and reading about that informs that, because he's a man that just always strove for more, and always, not only did he strive for more, he figured out the way to go that next step. And I think that's a lot of what we're missing these days, is in people not understanding what a next step could be. I also wanted to mention, I had no idea he had organized the entire Angela Davis.
So he was, you know, because you had to organize the party.
Right.
And it's not just, people think, oh, you just tell people what to do and they do. You have to win them, even members of the party, to the party's line. And of course, how would we conduct the movement to free Angela Davis, which was not going to be like the movement to free Huey Newton?
Right.
The consequences, the stakes, we felt were higher, because this was all connected up with the Soviet Union, with anti-communism, with the revolutionary forces on a world scale, all of that. So it was magnitudes higher, and it took professional revolutionaries to think this thing through. And that's the role that he played.
It was magnitudes bigger too. Like, my dad was sort of like, with my family, connected to communism in a way. He learned about Marxism, but he was never a communist. He was never in the party, nothing. But he talked about when they were shaking a can for Angela, you know, and donating and getting the union to kick in. I want to sort of change directions though, because this is something that interests me about your guys' project. James Baldwin is another key figure in your thought, right, in your project overall, and one that we at Midwestern Marks actually know the least about. So it'd be nice if you could sort of tell us a bit about Baldwin, who he was, and what from his thinking that you consider to be fundamental for this particular moment in history.
Can I just say one thing, Noah? You know, I know I was doing an interview, and the person interviewing me attempted to say that in my, I guess you could say, embrace of Du Bois, I was displacing or diminishing Marx. I said, nothing could be further from the truth. I said, to acknowledge Du Bois is not to negate Marx at all. To acknowledge Du Bois is to understand the logic and trajectory of Marxism, Leninism. And believe me, I guess I don't want to sound like an old head lecturing, but I'll say, believe me, an anti-Du Bois position ultimately is a position that eviscerates and weakens the strength and power of Marxism in this country. Du Bois is this great scientist. Baldwin, and so when we put Baldwin and King and Du Bois together, it is because we are trying to capture the revolutionary potentiality of our own people and the trajectory and logic of the revolutionary process here, organic to this country, not importing the experience of others, learning from it, but you can't substitute what was done somewhere else for what has to be done here. That's been a huge mistake of many. But Baldwin, for example, in the hoodie that you have on, Noah, it says, with W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King, we march to achieve our nation. That march to achieve our nation, that's directly from Baldwin, from The Fire Next Time. And what Baldwin, and this is so interesting, I thought about it as I tried to prepare my head for this conversation. We often talk about the struggle for democracy, but do not understand it in terms of what are the democratic tasks of the American people at this stage of the undoing of the state system, the system of control. What are the democratic tasks? People say, well, abortion rights. Well, that's part of it. Others would say the right of workers to organize. Others, and I think this is a fake thing of the Democratic Party, ending voter suppression. I don't know many Black people who think their vote has been suppressed, frankly. To Georgia or Mississippi, or if you come to Philadelphia and say, we're fighting against voter suppression, most people say, well, maybe you need to go to another state because
I still live in a Black neighborhood and we have perfectly open, no lies.
All the time.
Yeah.
The only problem is the political system suppresses the voters.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want anything to do with it. But when you look at Baldwin and King, let's say those two in particular, this idea that democracy is the democratic task is of the American people remaking themselves into a new people, into realizing their complete capacity. Now, no one is talking about absolutes. Clearly, we all recognize, as did King, as did Baldwin, as Du Bois did, that the struggle for democracy will be led by those who are most clear and most conscious. But, as Baldwin said, who consciously understand that the task of the American people as a people is to overcome all of the garbage and wrong thinking imposed upon the people by the ruling elite that says that we are not a single nation. We are a nation that is colonized on the black colonized people and the white colonizers, or we are divided in other ways. What Baldwin says, and this is what is so rich and I would say powerful, especially in his essays, and people that know Baldwin consider his essays to be his greatest achievement in terms of literature, although he's a profound novelist and playwright and poet. But his essays. And the thing about that is that a case can be made that Baldwin might be the greatest essayist in the English language. Maybe, or I'd say more to the point, the greatest essayist in the American English language. And then you could also say, yes, he and Du Bois, they are magnificent essayists, different styles, but in these essays that Baldwin writes, for example, you could just go on many topics. One, the function of the blues, which is a sociology of the spiritual life world reflected in the blues of the African American working class. Or you take the book of two essays, No Name in the Street, very long essays. The first titled, Take Me to the Water, the second, To Be Baptized. And what he interrogates is the world of struggle after the assassination of Martin Luther King, which was a deeply traumatic thing for him. And how do we go forward without this leadership? And so he looked to the Panthers, he looked to Angela, so just there, and that's published, I think that book was published 1971, 3 years after King's assassination. By the way, I don't think the nation, maybe doesn't know it yet, has not recovered from the assassination of Martin Luther King. That loss still haunts us. But Baldwin, who asserts that he is a socialist, that he is a revolutionary, he engages Eldridge Cleaver, the writer and leader of the Black Panther Party, on the question of homophobia, and not in a cancel culture type of way. He said, because Eldridge Cleaver had this sense of Black manhood that did not include homosexuality. He felt that homosexuality was a Black man's capitulation to white values. And in the essay, among other things, Baldwin says, he's speaking to Eldridge as his young head. And he says, probably Eldridge, when you were in prison, you met different kind of, and he used the word sissies, than I am. Baldwin was always firm about I'm gay, but I'm a man, and I'm a Black man. And my principal identity is not my sexual preference, but my commitment to Black freedom and the fact that I fight on the front lines of the struggle for freedom. And he says this, and it is refreshing. And so Baldwin is an antidote to identity politics. I was noticing, and I'm reading a book by Norman Finkelstein, where he's critiquing identity politics and cancel culture. And he has not yet referenced Baldwin, which to me weakens his argument. He's trying to make a Marxist critique of identity politics in the name of a socialist politics, i.e. Bernie Sanders, but he cannot understand that Baldwin understood the fight for democracy and for the American people far better than Bernie ever could or ever had the courage to attempt to understand. And that's what I would say about Baldwin, just off the top.
Oh yeah, thank you. I think that makes for a good transition into our next question. We think that the civil rights revolution that was led by Dr. King, which you mentioned, has largely been undermined by the modern contemporary left. And in our view, the movement that Dr. King was at the head at was one of the greatest moments of collective class struggle in our country's history. And the way that the movement and Dr. King transformed America created conditions where the struggle for socialism can take place and be waged in a more unified manner. So can you tell us a bit about your thoughts on Dr. King, the achievements of the civil rights revolution, and how they've shaped contemporary America?
Yeah, I can't. I'm laughing because it's so huge, so much. You know, in the free school, we said that, you know, King will be the father of a new American people. You know, he went to jail more than any other participant in the Black freedom movement. He was an intellectual and a revolutionary, and we know that's the necessary combination. You can't be a revolutionary and not understand the importance of ideas and ideology. King did, but he was a genius. And I guess if I haven't said it, fearless. You know, as a young guy, I couldn't understand it. You know, how can a revolutionary come out of the pulpit of a Baptist church? How can a revolutionary wear a suit and tie? How can a revolutionary base his approach to the American people and changing the American nation? How can he base that upon a principle of love? How could he, you know, it didn't fit for me at 19 years old, you know, and of course I knew it all then, right? But, you know, one of the things, you know, if I could put it this way, Eddie, you know, I'm listening to Trump's speech at the CPAC, Conservative PAC conference. And he says some incendiary things against the ruling class, which I applaud and, you know, very happy to hear him say, like, I am your retribution. You know, it doesn't get any better than that from a person running for president. But then there is a deep weakness in Trump. And I'm trying to say, you know, I want to shake him by his suit collars. Wake up. What you're missing is Martin Luther King. You cannot understand, quote, make America first or make America great if you do not understand Martin Luther King. And all of Trump's railing against what he calls communist and socialist, and he really, I don't think, knows. He's using no communism to label or smear some of the cultural identity politicians. But his movement cannot go forward unless it comes to terms with Martin Luther King and the great movement for Black freedom, which was ultimately a movement to free the American people. When Trump talks about, I will be the peace candidate in 2024. Well, but you got to go back to the great peace champion of the second part of the 20th century, and that's Martin Luther King. And then if you want to be real, throw in Muhammad Ali. You know, I think Trump has to understand that you're not reinventing the wheel. Even you, Donald Trump, are a product of a great movement that was led by Martin Luther King. And so, you know, let's say Trump is not elected, and that's a possibility. Where does his movement go? Ideologically, where does it go? It can't just be Trump. There's not enough there. Even though I respect his courage in standing up to the deep state and all of that, but there's not enough there. And so they must go back to Martin Luther King and the courage of the fighters for what we call civil rights, that great third American Revolution. And if people cannot understand, especially white America, the third American Revolution, it cannot understand the way out. The American people are filled with uncertainty and doubt and often cynicism because they see no way out. And so I think that King represents that imaginary, that visionary figure, even if you want to use the prophetic figure who brings together, and he was very conscious of this, the global struggle for national liberation and democracy and the struggle in this country. An amazing achievement, And yeah, King is huge. That's all I would say in the end.
It often seems like when Trump's movement is criticizing socialism, in substance, what they're criticizing is capitalism.
Or I think in substance, what they're criticizing are their opponents in the universities and who I call themselves socialists. And I don't think Trump understands how, in rhetoric or ideology, to grasp what is going on. He just doesn't know it. And even cats like Steve Bannon, who claims to be the Lenin of the right or whatever, they don't understand what's going on completely in the ideological architecture of the country at this time. So he's trying to address the people calling him a fascist, so he calls them communists. It's just, but that's what we have. We have to go through that in order to get to this new point in the political history of the country. And that's why even, with the free school, a lot of people, we can't go nowhere near Trump. We can't go nowhere near this. We can't go nowhere near MAGA rallies or something like this. I'm not saying I go anywhere near them. They're not near where I live, so I don't necessarily show up to them. But I'm not afraid of them because I know what my values and what my ideas are, and I'm prepared to share them with the MAGA people. And I'm convinced if they hear this, they will, because King is part of the deep structure of the conscious life of the American people. The American people are less racist today, in spite of all of this so-called wokeism and settler colonialism nonsense and all of that. The American people are less racist today than in 1963. They are more pro-peace than in 1970. There was and has been an ongoing revolution of values among white folk. The white working class, the white poor are not hostile to Black people or Black music for that matter.
It takes us a while to get it sometimes,
Say that again, Noah?
I said it takes us a while to get it, You just
But I don't see, that is the nature of the political system that was established by the ruling class. You know, white folk as a whole have never been adverse to Black culture and especially Black music. In fact, especially in the South, the Allman Brothers, Stevie Ray Vaughan, I guess a lot more, you know. Even you take Dylan and them, you know, it is all anchored, rooted in the blues. And then, of course, the R&B, the rhythm and blues influence upon American music and white consciousness. Because, you know, once you go to that R&B, you know, and then you can take that into jazz or go from jazz into R&B. You're dealing with a narrative rooted in Black resistance. And if the music of the nation is the music of Black resistance in its multiple forms, you know, for example, Curtis Mayfield singing, there's a train a coming, get on board. It's the freedom train. Marvin Gaye, what's going on? Aretha Franklin, young, gifted, and Black. Well, you got a lot of white people that identify themselves damn near as Black. So if she sings young, gifted, and Black, they say, oh yeah, I'm in this poor little town up in here, ain't got good schools. I'm young, gifted, and Black. This is very interesting. And Baldwin kind of anticipates this. He says, you are only white because you have to have me as Black. But if you don't have that division, then you are no longer white. And, you know, I could have this wrong, but my sense is that increasingly large numbers, especially at the level of the poor and working class of white people, are, you know, kind of confused about their racial identity. And a lot of times, if they have a choice, they would think of themselves, maybe not say it like this, as more Black than what is considered white. This is revolutionary. And this is the revolutionary function of African American music. In a lot of ways, you know, one of our greatest influences upon the consciousness of the American people and of the working class. Because if you can hear my song, you can know my soul. And that's the issue. Can we see the souls of Black people? Can you feel the suffering? See, and this is, if I might, do you mind if I just make one other point? This is why Tucker Carlson, he says a lot of good things, and then he gets to this, and he's a complete idiot. A complete idiot. And even Trump, he says that a Black prosecutor attacking him because he's Trump and leading the Trump movement, that Black person is a racist. No, Donald, that ain't the way you do it. You got to think more deeply. You know what I'm saying? But the Black consciousness in music, literature, art, social science is all over the culture of this society. Most people cannot think of this country whenever they think of it without Martin Luther King Jr. They know King. Most people, you know, there was a time of classic rock and all that's good, classic rock and the British invasion. But at the end of the day, most Americans see Black music as the organic American music. And I think that's very important.
Especially since, a lot of the contributions of I guess white music is not fully white. Like you look at CCR, there's not a day that goes past that I don't listen to CCR, and it's just straight
CCR, by the way.
Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But
innovations like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and the way they did harmony, or James Taylor, or Joni Mitchell, or Bob Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation on a theme, on a common foundation, and that's the thing that's so hip,
I wanted to mention, just to kind of go back to the point about MLK, and he's not like ignored, but people haven't understood, I think, especially on the left, the revolutionary significance of the movement that he led and how it changed things. And I think in part, the framework that we've used to think about this has been the purity fetish, but also a concept that comes back from Dimitrov, which is national nihilism, which is connected to that, because they read American history as impure, because it's got, bad stuff and also not so bad and good stuff. The impurity in that totality leads them to reject it and to just define it through the bad parts, define it in a very synecdochal fashion. And, when you do that, you're bound to not understand the progressive parts or consider them as if they're outside of America and not imminent developments from America, which means that you're not able to understand King, you're not able to understand Du Bois, you're not able to understand Douglas. You can, keep going back, and there's a whole host of things you're not able to understand. But most immediately, if you're not able to understand King, you're not able to understand the nation. And you're not able to understand the changes, the radical changes that have taken place. And if you can't do that, you can't build socialism, because socialism is not this abstract thing that exists in general. If you treat socialism like that, it's just empty. The universal has to be concretized. It has to be realized through the particular. So socialism in the US is going to have to be embedded in a love for our people and a knowledge of its history, and in the ability that Du Bois, that King, that Baldwin, that Winston had to feel the pulse of where the American people's hearts were beating. And, that is missing, I think, completely in the left. I see it tied to the purity fetish and to this phenomenon of national nihilism, which also expresses itself through these pseudo-radical theories of, settler colonialism and stuff that are really just, in the name of Du Bois, in the name of King, proliferating the divisions that those thinkers theorized for the sake of overcoming.
Carlos, now we're going out into deep water, and we're gonna, because you brought up a very sensitive issue: settler colonialism, the counter-revolution of 1776. I know Gerald. I've known Gerald for over 40 years. Gerald was in the Communist Party, Gerald Horn, in the Communist Party. I use the language, a true believer. I don't mean that as a trivialization, but, he understood the world like we understood it, in terms of that the Soviet Union would be an enduring factor in world politics and revolutionary politics. The collapse of the Soviet Union leads him, like many other people, traumatically to make wrong decisions about the future and about their politics. Gerald's 1776 book is his attempt to make sense of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And almost like Francis Fukuyama's claim of the end of history, in that 1776 book, Gerald literally foresees the end of the class conflict. And there's no two ways about it now. The thesis itself is anti-revolutionary. And therefore, Gerald Horn has to rethink his relationship to Du Bois and Black Reconstruction. And his thesis is anti-Du Boisian. It's obviously anti-King. He must, and I haven't spoken to him about this, he must see King as a naive dreamer, reformer, who did not understand the essence of Black oppression. Now, if you went back 30 years ago, Gerald was not talking about a colonial thesis. In fact, I think he would have repudiated it, as we all did at that time. And then to refer to the mass of white working people as settlers, not as workers, a type of, how could you say, all right, disappointment that things have not played out the way you thought they would, but then a disappointment that seeks somebody to blame. And so it is the white poor, it is the white working class. He is harder on the white working class than he is on the white ruling class, in fact. Yeah, that's...
We had a question about this we were going to plan to do later on, but I think this is a great time to bring it up. And this is something that strikes me as interesting. And you mentioned the timing, right? The fall of the Soviet Union changes everything.
Yes, it does.
And how everyone no matter where they came from, thought about the future of America. And to just go back on everything that you had come to know, come to understand. You know, I sort of watched my mom go through kind of the same thing. I mean, she didn't adopt like the settler colonialism thing, but she I remember her crying when we watched and I was a little kid, you know, I was like 11. I couldn't understand what was going on, but watching the tanks roll into Moscow, right? She's crying and she's going, it's over now. It's all over. And it affects everyone differently. And to speak of the settler colonialism thing, this is an interesting time because if we think about the effects of the civil rights revolution and Black people no longer legally, at any rate, prevented from entering the middle classes. This is big, right? And we start seeing, African-American studies, entire institutes being built at colleges. And this is awesome stuff, right? And then we see the sort of turn towards this settler colonialism thesis at the same time. And I wonder what connection there is between these two like phenomenon, if you know what I mean, the class phenomenon and the cultural one.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think it will require a lot more research into the history of ideas, into the sociology of ideas. I can't fully answer it. You know, I saw people that I respected and cared about, like Horn and like Angela Davis, become almost the opposite of that which I had associated them with. Such a change. But it did, all of that reflected certain weaknesses in our political life, in the politics of the left of that time, and the politics of and the ideology and life world of the Communist Party. We were not quite what we thought we were. And that's not a bad thing, you never fully know. But there were some severe weaknesses because, you know, and I'm not making a big thing of me, pardon me, my option, first of all, was let's wait and see. This is after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Gorbachev thing, and the collapse of the world communist movement. Of course I'm angry. I wasn't traumatized. I mean, in revolutions, the revolutions and counter-revolutions. There's no, like Carlos said, there's no pure anything. So my thing is, let's wait and see. But I'm not going to, and I did not stand up and proclaim, oh, woe is me, I made a mistake, I thought this, oh, they didn't tell us, all that old BS, you know what I'm saying? We should be grown people. We know, or should have known, that the forces that we're opposing are hugely powerful and not to be taken lightly. So Angela goes towards liberalism and feminism, liberal feminism. Horn goes towards what I call neo-Garveyism and a kind of cultural nationalism, which accepts really what I think is unacceptable and inaccurate, the permanent disunity of the working class. And so he says the slogan "Black and White Unite and Fight" should be replaced with the slogan "Africans of the World Unite and Fight." Well, first of all, if you don't have the slogan and the practice of black and white unite and fight, you don't have unions, industrial unions. That was the slogan upon which that struggle took place. The same thing, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and Ella Baker, and I mean, just all of them knew about the movement of the 30s. That movement of uniting black and white workers was at the base of the tactics of the civil rights movement. Perhaps with a larger, we could say larger, theoretical, philosophical, ideological framing to now uniting black and white to change the nation and to change black and white people. That's Baldwin. But then to reject all of that in the name of the idea that America has known nothing but counter-revolution it is to back ourselves into a corner out of which we cannot fight. It's just, it's sad to me. And with Gerald, I feel a lot of sympathy, really. I feel it's too late in the day, too late in the game, Gerald, to go there. That's not where you need to be. That's, your contribution is being nullified, negated by your current position. But I don't think he can come out of it now. I think he's so into it, so committed to it. But it is an anti-revolutionary stance.
Yeah, for me, it seems to, not just be ahistorical. We can look at what I often call the American trajectory, and it's one of continually overcoming division, right? Just fighting over and over. And we can look at the advanced sections of that, and in hindsight, look at what makes up the vanguard and why it was that.
That's right.
But at the same time, the thought sort of follows this struggle. And the general, this is why you talk about America being a far less racist place than it ever was.
Yep.
And so it puts you into this objectively reactionary position where you're trying to go back to before this happened. And it's almost a utopian one as well, because you're setting up this ideal society to think about that is back there somewhere where it's still divided. And but just, where we don't have to deal with the horror that was our history. Yeah.
And our history is not only horror.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you know, these figures, Martin Luther King is a product of the American struggle. He is not some alien or he is a part of America. That's what he says. That's the way he talks. I mean, Frederick Douglass. They all, this is, when I say American, I'm talking about the American people. You know, what Robert Owens talks about, what Eugene Debs talks about, what Harriet Tubman talks about, what Sojourner Truth talks about. Nobody involved in struggles for freedom would ever denounce the people of their own country, and they never did. I don't know of any enslaved Africans who asserted a settler colonialist thesis or counter-revolution of 1776 thesis. They just never did it. And the question is why? And why does this theory get such resonance today? What is it about today that makes this kind of theorizing possible and indeed popular among elites? What makes it so?
That's what I was just going to mention. Not only does it resonate today, it resonates in the ruling class.
Right.
It resonates and wins accolades and publishing credits and all of that and big fat paychecks. And not to say that people are, you know, interested only in money, not at all. But there's a reason that that's where they throw their weight.
There's no.
That's what they want to give people, you know. And it's because it puts us in a position where, like Carlos was saying, we have a national nihilism and all of our revolutionary potential is gone. Because if you see revolutionary potential in only like 15% or 20% of the population, then you don't see revolutionary potential.
While simultaneously, the potential of the American people are as great as possible, which is the other thing, right? You have less than 20% feel like Congress, their representatives are actually representing them. 60% are living paycheck to paycheck, you know, so they lose a paycheck, they join the 600,000 that are on the streets in a country with 33 times as many empty homes as homeless people. You know, more than 50% are against this proxy war that we're waging against Russia. And they see their leaders, you know, doing everything they can to serve finance capital and the big monopolists. Absolutely. And Silicon Valley, and not them, you know, and you know, what better example to bring this fact in your face than the Ohio-Palestine derailment that's affecting, I don't know even how many of the American people. It could be millions. Some estimates say millions could be affected by this.
Wow.
The fighting was in Kiev. You know, the American people are not stupid. They see this. They see this. So it's I think a time where the potential of the American people is as high as I think it has ever been. And simultaneously, the crisis of the left is as profound as it has ever been.
Right. And the thing is, Carlos, I agree with you completely. And I think the Free School would agree with you. The capacity of the American people to fight for democracy, a new democracy, a people's democracy, is greater now than it has been maybe since the Civil War, maybe higher than that, because the crisis is deeper than it's ever been. But I think we have to abandon any attempt to save the, quote, left. I think it's too far gone. Whatever will come forward will be something new. But it will have its roots in so much of the American struggle, the American history. But it will be new. And you know, those of us who take a stance for radical and revolutionary change in this country as the way out, have to also take a stance against what can only be described as a fake and empty left, a left without any criteria of defining what is left. It's so interesting. I mean, we had in the past associated left with socialism and revolution and radical democracy and all of that. Now, today, left is liberalism and I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I mean, because all you have to say is I'm left, and we're supposed to believe you're left. So you can be left and anti-revolutionary.
That seems to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carlos. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That seems to follow this larger tendency of bourgeois individualism at our age, where it's just any objective assessment of the world is just tossed down in favor of subjective identification.
Which follows, I think we have to be open and straightforward about it. Most of what we call the left has been captured by the ideology of the ruling class. I mean, they're afraid. They don't say anything that will upset the liberals. Their political practice is so tame, and they only do what is acceptable to ruling elites.
I wonder if it will ever occur to them that you're no different from the liberal elites and their forces if you talk like them, you walk like them, you put all your time and effort into supporting them. I don't understand where they believe a dividing line is.
Well, but let me say this, because I've had the, opportunity to talk to some of them, and they say, we will use the liberals. I mean, really, this is in a socialist party. A guy told me this. I said, well, how do you know they're not using you? And then, of course, this idea that revolutionary practice is defined by activism and not ideas it puts me off tremendously. And all of this, it is self-serving, I guess, Carlos. It's very self-serving because they try to define themselves as different from the right. I was in an interview and it blew my mind when this interviewer, this person I was conversing with, said that Tulsi Gabbard and Glenn Greenwald are the right. I said, well, wait a minute, hold it. Now, this is a little bit strange. And he, the interviewer, was, I guess, assuming that he is the left. And I just find this self-serving, narcissistic politics that defines itself as left to be something so egregious and something so, I use this word, despicable, as I don't even have words for it. It makes politics into identity politics, even among those who call themselves socialists, and even those who call themselves communists. And I haven't yet even dealt with Trotskyism, which is a major issue.
It sort of turns them into Trotskyists, though,
Definitely.
playing that same role. And it reverts all of the thought into dogmas. If you don't go with whatever their dogmas are, you can be safely dismissed as like the right or pandering to the right or whatever that is supposed to mean, because they see things in terms of, well, this is our good versus that is their bad, right? And traditionally, that's what the actual right did, right? Dismissed anything outside of the traditions they had. And it's wild to see the sort of reversal of that, right? I work with all libertarians and people like that. These people are more open to actually hearing about real socialism, real motion of history, than any of these so-called leftists that literally call themselves communists when they first meet me. And when I begin talking about this, they're like, oh, you're such a right-winger. I'm like, what do you mean? This is literally what Lenin said. Was Lenin a right-winger? You know?
Hey, Noah, let me just say this to you. Very interesting. These people who are now the communists, back in the days where there were consequences to be paid, like losing your job and other things, they were socialist. They were the workers, this or the work. Well, how do you become communist now when the ruling class is prepared to give you a pass on it? But that to me, because everything has a history. These parties, these movements, these individuals have histories. And where were you, let us say, in 1970, when the struggle on a world scale was reaching an apogee? Where were you? What did you call yourself? And to them, just to be real, I mean, I don't mean to discredit anybody, but the great war against fascism in the 1940s, a lot of the people who trace a tradition back to, let us say, Trotskyism, took a position: we're not going to take sides. Or better, we're finding ways to negotiate with the Nazis because they felt that the Soviet Union, which was, quote, Stalinist, was the greater threat. Or they were both threats, and perhaps they would destroy one another. Well, if you took I'm not going to take a position on fascism, or the legacy from which you come, took that position in the 1940s, then how are you going to come up in, let's say, the 2010s or 2023, and suddenly you're an anti-fascist fighter? You have to reconcile. What were you talking about then? And how do you reconcile that with what you think and say today? I think this is a great problem for us, for all of us, and for our people. This fake caricature of communism, of the tactics and strategy, of the history of communists. Our people must know. That's one reason, I'm very put off by attacks on Stalin.
Mm.
Socialism in one country. Well, what do you do if you can't get it in more countries? You build it in one country until you get it in more countries. You understand where I'm coming from? All this, as you say, Carlos, this so-called purity shit.
Mm-hmm. It's we're gonna have to wrap up soon here, unfortunately. But I do want to say, when I went to Philly for the Dubois Symposium, fantastic. And we go out to this Indian restaurant.
Oh, wait a minute, Noah, before you go any further.
Yeah.
When I saw you, I went over, hey, Noah, what's up, money?
Mm-hmm. First thing he does, he turns, he's like, Noah, and walked, took me in, got me some coffee. It was great. But so afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Everyone at the free school, nicest people, take me out for Indian food, refused to let me pay. But there was this one girl there who, the whole night, nice girl, couldn't be nicer, right? Until it came to talk about politics, when she wanted to argue against socialism in one country with me, right? And I'm just like, look, I can't do it, man. Just look at the Soviet Union did it already. Let's just let's go on to what's really important, right?
Yeah, but you know, I think I know who you're talking about. A young woman, a very bright young woman.
Yeah.
And you know, help. I mean, that's why in the free school, like, all of them are young. I'm old, so I'm like, I like connect them to back in the days.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of shit that would take the average young person down and confuse them and have them, you know, like one of those things on that, you know, what is it? On that thing going around and around.
Hamster wheel. Yeah.
You know, they be on that and ultimately be discouraged. But once you can connect things, I can say, look, you know, I was back in the days with the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. Now I'm in this days and stuff, you know. But if you don't have that, you can't. It's difficult to figure it out on your own. And there are no books that will explain this. You need the experience and narrative of people who were there, you know. And I know that, and sadly, she doesn't. Young, and there's no hit on her.
You should have heard what I was saying when I was that age. It's fine.
Yeah.
People can learn.
But she didn't know the civil rights movement, you know, and that's the big weakness all the time, because you can't get from the civil rights movement or from there to here without understanding that movement. And we still don't know enough. We have to learn more. But that was the big weakness.
Well, we're getting right around the hour 51 mark. Can you tell us a little bit about the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation? Where can people find you guys, and really what is it? What is it about? What are you currently working on? Perhaps tell us a little bit about the Korea event before, and also before we go, make sure to stay on so we can chat after the live.
It's all trash. Yeah.
That's when, you know, all the stuff comes out. Yeah.
And then I can curse without constraint, because I've been wanting to curse, but I know, you know, there's certain community standards.
You should. Carlos makes fun of me all the time because every time I curse, I apologize afterwards.
Well, you know, the Saturday Free School, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary. We were founded at Temple University in order to link African American studies to the Black community, but all students in all disciplines to the community around the university. Like I said, we ended up at the Church of the Advocate. But the main thing is we believe in the centrality of the ideological struggle, that at the end of the day, ideas and the truth wins out. Our political practice is with churches and mosques and community organizations. And sadly, because of the takeover of many of the unions by woke social democrats and liberals, the kind of access, and I mean real great access we had in the union movement is no longer there. But, you know, the working classes and its churches and its mosques and its community organization, and that's who we work with. We don't hide who we are, what we think, you know, we had the symposium on Du Bois, which I think was a very successful event, a landmark event. It was titled "The Black Proletariat and the Fourth American Revolution." We saw the third one is the Civil Rights Revolution, the Fourth American Revolution, and then, of course, the making of a new people, which is Baldwin and King and Dubois. In less than 2 weeks, we're having a 2-day conference on Korea, on the fight, the struggle to unite the Korean Peninsula, the Korean people, Korean civilization against U.S. imperialism and the threat of nuclear war. It's going to be, I wish you guys could come up for that. It's going to be really, really a powerful event, because what we're trying to get at is what are the foundations for peace and unity on the Korean Peninsula, and how has imperialism disrupted the civilizational movement of the Korean people. And this is a fascinating story. And we're going to spend a lot of time on North Korea, on the philosophy of Jute by Kim Il-sung. We feel that the great force for Korean unity, for the Korean civilization, for the Korean language even, is North Korea. It's an extraordinary society. It has overcome so many things, which means, and this is one of the things we're trying to do, is to draw out lessons from Korean civilization to help our people more clearly understand the ways that we can achieve unity, and how important the fight for peace is, especially, it's not just the threat of nuclear war in Ukraine, but probably more dangerously on the Korean Peninsula. So that's what we're going to be doing with that. And of course, you might know we're, we've had, so Todd Doherty said, and we stream every Saturday. You can go to our Facebook page, the Saturday Free School, or our YouTube channel. We believe in art, we believe in ideas, we believe in the unity of the people, we believe in the ideological struggle. We're optimists. I don't know of any pessimists in the free school. Noah could tell you that. It's a lot of laughter, a lot of joking.
I got to say real quick, thank you to Todd, because if it weren't for Todd, we never would have hooked up with the free school people.
Yeah, Todd. Thank God for Todd. And I don't think I would have known you guys were not for Todd, you know?
I want to say that I think the Korea event is so extremely important. I come from a country that's been blocked by the U.S. for 60 years, and it's been such a criminal, 6 decades of hybrid warfare against Cuba. But really, I don't think anything matches what the empire has done to Korea in terms of bombing, in terms of devastation, in terms of propaganda. The level of dehumanization of the Korean people really has just gotten so far. And Eddie does these wonderful takedown videos of Yeonmi Park and all these tabloid folks that get very rich off of just saying completely absurd and baseless shit about North Korea and get hundreds of millions of views and massive contracts. And it's really criminal, the level of dehumanization. And we're starting to see something similar, I think, with the Russians now as the war is ramping up, and definitely with the Chinese as well. But I don't think anything matches the level of dehumanization that we've seen with the Koreans.
I agree with you. And that's why I think what they have achieved might be, and when I understand, might be greater than any other socialist or revolutionary country. Because even China's growth was in a period of détente between the United States and China. North Korea never had that, always. And how did they build this society? It's unbelievable to me. Unbelievable. and the unity of its people, a small nation, but a nation that is prepared to resist any encroachment, any attempt to undo its revolution. So we're going to be trying to look at all of that. And we're going to live stream it as well.
Well, I, for one, can't wait for that. I really wish we could come in person. Anyway, thank you so much for your time with us, Doc. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I can't wait to have you back on again sometime. And we'll, deepen all the discussions we've already started, but I got 1,000 more questions. So get ready.
I have to pardon myself. I probably spoke too much.
No, not even close.
I was just telling Noah before you came on that in the Saturday schools that when you say, I'm sorry, just one more point, I wish you would just keep going. Instead of apologizing for pausing, just keep going. And I think the audience felt some of that. But I want to say that we linked the YouTube channel of the Saturday Free School to the chat, and we'll link it also to the video when it uploads fully to YouTube. And you can find them on Facebook as well through the just Saturday Free School, and you'll be able to find them.
These other people, come here, Alice, so they can see you, and come here, Emily. No, come on, they want to say hi. These are my people. Come here. Yeah. Hey, let me tell you something. This is something that has to be explained also. How all these Asians are in the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. It's deeper than deep, man. So
it's a good example of how far this country's come.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. On that note, that's it for us today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a great rest of your day.
Without a radical redistribution of political